Now, we know in March this year, George Osborne announced during the budget that he wanted every school in the country to be at least in the process of academisation by 2020. And while there has definitely been some U-turning around that target, certainly the direction of travel is for more and more secondary and primary schools to start to become academies. And certainly if we look at a piece of research that was published in TES about a month ago now, while the government doesn't have a legislative stick to kind of beat schools with to force them to become academies, there are certainly various techniques they'll be using to try and encourage more and more schools, be it failing schools, or be it schools where there is a critical mass of academies within the local education authority to become academies. So while that target may not be hard and fast anymore, it's certainly the direction of travel. And it's certainly having a knock-on effect on teachers, head teachers within the industry, and of course suppliers as well. And I'm very pleased to welcome a panel who really have a lot of first-hand experience of how this is developing. And we'll talk for a couple of minutes about their personal experience, and then we'll go out and take questions from the floor. But firstly, from right to left, I'm very pleased to welcome to the panel Jason Gould from the Education Company. And Jason, as many of you will be aware, has taken on the quite ambitious challenge that BISA has set him over the last couple of months to start to undertake a systematic project of looking at multi-academy trusts and how they procure. There's now 973, according to Sir David Carter, across the country. That's increasing very rapidly. And one of the things that they certainly don't have at the moment is any consistency in how they procure and how they engage with suppliers. And Jason's going to talk a little bit about his initial findings and experiences with that. I'm also extremely pleased to welcome to the panel Darren Woollard from Blenheim Primary School in Southend. I'm also pleased to welcome Claire Cantle from All Saints School, who's the designate head teacher, soon to become head. To my left, Joe Palmer-Tweed, who's the executive director of the Essex and Thames Primary SCITT, and also writes a fantastic blog and tweets very voraciously around education. I do encourage you to follow her if you don't already. And then finally, on my far left, Jeremy Crook, who is the head of a school that went through the academisation process and now works as a consultant with a range of MATs and academies. And I'm really keen to hear about your insights about how you found that, Jeremy. But without further ado, I'm keen to hand over to Jason for 2 or 3 minutes to talk about your experiences with the MAT research in particular.
Yes, we were very proud to be offered the opportunity to do the research for BISA, but it did feel a little bit like being given a big bowl of spaghetti and somebody saying, what's going on in there? So we've started that work, and everything that we've done so far is anecdotal. But the first probably factual point is when we started there were 842 MATs and now there's 973. So we better get a move on, otherwise we are never going to finish. This is going to just keep going on and on and on. As I say, everything that we've done so far has been anecdotal, but just to give you a quick idea of what we're doing, we're planning to speak to every single MAT in the country. Just to explain one thing that I think has confused a lot of people, a lot of the MATs only actually have one school. Which it seems like a contradiction in terms. Just to sort of help people understand that is just because they've set up in the legal framework that allows them to add multiple schools, and they've made that statement of intent. So a lot of those schools that have one academy, look out for them because they are definitely planning to expand. Personally, this is just a personal thought. I probably started this research fairly negative view of MATs and what they were doing, and that probably came from your sort of sense of morals and politics, etc. But having just been doing this for 4 weeks, I have to say that my opinion of maths has changed dramatically. We've watched a lot of select committee videos. They're all on iPlayer. If you really do have some idle few hours, you can actually put them onto your iPhone and listen to them, but just keep your phone looking the other way, so otherwise you could get into all sorts of trouble. But it is fascinating to know that the majority of the maths are actually made up of educationalists. They're not really made up of business people. And one of the bits of the research we're doing is we'll be publishing to all of you for every single MAT, the makeup of the board in terms of what percentage are from business and what percentage are from education. And overwhelmingly, at the moment, it does appear that they're from education. And I think that's important for us to understand because the MATs and the academies are there to increase attainment and reduce the attainment gap. There is nothing that's stated about changing procurement practices. That is not why they've been started. Now, I'm not sure if anyone on the panel would agree with that, but that for everybody we've spoken to, it certainly isn't the first point that they want to talk about. As I say, I'm probably slightly different to everybody here because we're just part of the research, and these guys will obviously know what it's like on the ground.
Thank you very much, Jason. Darren, if I could hand over about
Yeah, of course.
Academisation.
Blenheim is a three-form entry school in Southend. We are about to become an academy on the 1st of September, but the process for us has been ongoing for the last couple of years, so I'll be happy to talk about our experience. I think it's important to understand the primary context firstly. There are not a significant number of primary academies across the country, but there is a growing number. I think the figure around March was about 17% nationally. But it is growing. I chair the Southend Primary Heads Network, and every school in Southend has academisation on its agenda. We are all looking around for who we want to partner with and trying to be part of the future and being the masters of our own destiny rather than waiting for a sponsor to perhaps come along and pick off an underperforming school in a way which we wouldn't want for our schools. I think that one of the key things is that nobody wants to be the last one standing, particularly in Southend. We use that analogy of being the last one on the dance floor and no one to dance with. And that's not what we want for our schools in Southend. And so we're trying to take ownership of the agenda by forming our own trusts. The first question we asked ourselves as a school was, what did we want to gain from a partnership? We're a good school. We aspire to be an outstanding school, but it's not what defines us. We want to be a great school. In fact, I met with our new parent intake yesterday and said to them, if in 7 years' time they can come back to me and say that they made the right choice in choosing our school, if their children are happy and confident and successful learners, then we will know whether or not we've got an Ofsted Outstanding badge, that we've done a good job for those children. We want to work with other great schools, and that's something that we really looked for in choosing a multi-academy trust. Initially, we were thinking about setting one up for ourselves, but we also wanted to see what was out there. The trust that we have joined, or will be joining, is the Learning in Harmony Trust. It's based in Newham. There are 4 Newham schools currently that form that trust. So it's actually breaking the mould a little bit because we're going outside of our borough. But the reason for that is because we feel that there's an enormous amount we can gain from working with schools outside of Southend, and we think we have an enormous amount to offer to those schools as well. And certainly our experience of working with those schools in the short term has been extremely positive. I think Academies brings around a few positives for us. The first is achieving economies of scale. So for you guys as suppliers, suddenly we're not a school of 600-700 pupils anymore. We're a multi-academy trust with 3 to 5,000, and that will continue to grow. And so as much as in the past when I've gone to bet, my head teacher badge has been gold dust to your various representatives, I think the CEO badge is probably going to be one higher as we go forward from this point. One of the big factors for us was the curriculum freedom that being an academy will bring. The 2014 national curriculum didn't fill us all with a huge amount of confidence, and there were some things in there that we weren't particularly keen on. And so being an academy allows us that curriculum freedom and means that we will be able to decide for ourselves what's right for our children in terms of engaging them, inspiring them and creating learners for the next generation. Another big factor for us is the challenge and support that being an academy brings. It won't be a surprise to any of you that local authorities' resources are diminishing. They have far less capacity to support schools, particularly good schools. Their focus is on schools that might require improvement or have specific issues. And so school-to-school support is a real viable alternative to that. We welcome the challenge and support that being an academy will bring us. We're working with a fantastic group of head teachers, and I think the future for our trust is very bright indeed.
Thank you very much, Darren. Claire.
Okay. Good morning. We are All Saints School is an 11 to 18 Catholic comprehensive in the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, and we're at the point of we're still a school. We haven't academised, but there are a number of discussions, and really what I was going to speak about are the thought processes we're going through, because no partnership is ever perfect, is it? So if we're entering into it, we need to know we're doing the best for our children. We want to make sure that we maintain the vision and ethos of our school. We want to be clear on the benefits that it will bring to our students and our community, but also we want to know what the downsides are and how we can mitigate them. What would be the considerations for us if we remained as a standalone academy? What other existing federations or MATs are around us? What stage are they at, and what are their success rate of bringing about improvement and challenge? What would they bring for us? and actually talking to other schools we might like to work with that haven't academised, what is their stage in this thought process? So our thinking is, at the minute, quite open. So if we went for a single academy status on our own, we would have all the freedoms you speak about the curriculum and our academy. But we would also be looking to make school-to-school support networks and alliances. And I think a lot of these are established in schools in quite a soft way. These would need to be firmed up and made more robust. But do we, and this is the question we ask, by doing this, almost make ourselves a little bit isolated? Because there may well be good institutions around us that are already in maths that would like to work with us, however are committed to the improvement plan of the trust they're in and cannot expend further resources to us. Do we enter into a MAT? We're currently talking with a number of primary head teachers that we're working with, all brilliant head teachers, and all share the school-to-school support, the school-led improvement system. We all wholeheartedly buy into that, the sharing of resources and the good practice. There is a common anxiety, and I was at a conference the other day where another school was talking about the appointment of a CEO, that the CEO, if it was to emerge from within, as one of them, could cause a little bit of unrest. And also the changes to governance. If you've got a really good governing board like I work with currently, there would be a change to governance that I'd quite like to keep the governors I'm working with. But if you look at what we could do halfway to alleviate some of those anxieties, create a shadow mat for a period of time. Because the current thinking is a rotating CEO doesn't work and a flat leadership doesn't work. Those that have done it have come back and gone, do you know, we need somebody there. So do we form a shadow mat where we establish what we want, what works for us, and we grow as a mat before we make that commitment? Because the sense of urgency is not necessarily there, because what we have to do, whatever the governors and the leadership of the schools decide, we have to make sure that we're building future capacity and that we're able to effectively sustain the excellence we aspire in every institution that we work with. So that's where we're at.
Thank you very much, Claire. Over to you, Jay.
I think from my perspective, there's definitely no doubt that we are all still kind of being swept forward on this great sort of Govian wave of school-ledness. And actually that's not a bad thing. I think that's a positive thing. The way that we work with a partnership of 120 primary schools from London and spreading right the way across Essex. And included in that are a large number of MATs now. I also think it's very interesting that once the kind of pressure, schools felt the pressure was off a little bit in terms of being academised, lots of them suddenly are thinking about doing it. And I think that's kind of an indication of what happens when you try to tell schools what to do. The changes that we're noticing in the way that schools are operating, aside from the procurement issues, we're seeing what we expected we would start to see across our partnership of schools, which is in terms of the changing curriculum, maths, English, pretty much as the curriculum dictates, and that's very obviously because of Ofsted. And I think it's unrealistic really to say that we have got huge freedoms in some of those areas because we haven't yet. But what we are seeing is a big shift in foundation subjects. So the way that schools are teaching the curriculum, particularly in terms of the pedagogic approaches, is shifting really dramatically from school to school and from mat to mat. I think there is something about being a single academy that might feel quite liberating, but it's still quite a scary place for schools to be. Being part of a mat, there is something about strength in numbers, and we're seeing definitely the biggest shifts in approaches to teaching and learning in mats that are kind of very coherent and strong. Some of our schools, and I can talk about a school that Darren's school is working with, we're seeing things like 5-minute lesson observations. You know, we never saw that before because everybody felt they had to do things in a particular way. Other schools, we're seeing large numbers of teaching assistants who are actually carrying a huge amount of the teaching load, but they're planning and assessing with qualified teachers. And those people are then kind of being trained internally in a sort of grow your own kind of model. So the diversity in terms of what we're seeing is increasing and increasing and increasing, and I have no doubt that is going to continue at quite a pace. But that's exciting. That's really, really exciting. And to find schools taking more ownership where they have the capacity to do that, and in maths I firmly believe a lot of them do, is a really wonderful place for the education system to be, actually. I think in terms of implications for publication, because of the conversations that we have with schools around their approaches to the curriculum, there are more and more conversations emerging about research, and particularly around research-informed practice. So I would kind of say, if I was going to say, you know, if there's anything you have to take note of, it's that. It's the fact that these MATs are buying on a bigger scale, and they are more discerning, and what they really want to know is that whatever you are offering them is properly underpinned with academic research.
Thank you very much, Jo. And we will be going out and taking some questions in a minute, so please do think if you have any questions. But finally, over to Jeremy.
My school, when I was head teacher, became an academy. Jo said it was scary if you're a standalone academy. We were a standalone. No one in our area even was considering becoming an academy. We were a very successful school. We became an academy because of procurement reasons, you'll be pleased to know. The local authority refused to fund the things we needed, and we could not get a new roof. We couldn't replace our crumbling playground. We couldn't take the asbestos out of my school, which was sitting just above the ceiling tiles. And so for us, becoming an academy was driven by those things, because we already had the passion for excellence, and we already had the freedom, because basically we ignored what the local authority told us, because we did what we think was right for our children. The academy process does not lead to greatness. If you're a great local authority school, it's because you've got great leadership, and you've got great teachers, and you've got great teams, and you've got parents who support what you do and love what you do. And that's why you're a great school. It's nothing to do with being an academy. So when my school became an academy, I had quite a lot of parents who were ideologically against it, because they thought I was a Tory. And I was in a very working class traveller community environment. And so at our parent meetings, I was accused of being after the money for myself, which was very interesting when I said I'd turned down my last 5 pay rises when we were a local authority school because we couldn't afford it. And the school just wanted to pay me because they thought I was doing a good job. And I said, actually, I want it because I want it for your children. So I want a roof where when it rains, the water doesn't come into the electrical fittings. I want a playground which doesn't crumble at the edges so your children fall over, because your children deserve a 21st century education. We set our 5-year goals. We achieved them as an academy. Fantastic, successful school, everyone loved the place. With Darren, Ofsted didn't say we were outstanding, because the last inspection I had, we had 3 traveller children join the school in April in year 6. And they hadn't been to school for 2 years. And Ofsted said our results had dipped. I said, they haven't dipped. I've had 3 traveller children join the school. They said, we'll call it a dip, Jeremy, never mind. We can come back next year and then you'll be outstanding. So that was all very interesting. Now I go off and work with academies, multi-academy trusts. Very interesting what Jo says. A lot of purchasing power. Some of them purchase randomly, absolutely randomly. They come to me and they say, what do you recommend? And I say, well, what are you aiming for? What is it that you want? What does the research say about what your schools need? What do you need in your trust? What does this school need, and this school need, and this school need, and this school need? Or are you just saying, let's get a maths scheme? And what I find I spend a lot of my time doing is saying, well, let's identify what's needed in each of your schools, and then we can very carefully prioritise what they need. And in procurement terms, when I say what Jo says, I say, what does the research says? The latest research says this. One example, I was in a school down in southeast London the other day and watching a lesson, and they'd just bought a maths scheme based on the Singapore maths approach. And the head said, it's marvellous, it's wonderful. It's only what good maths teachers were doing 20 years ago before anyone mentioned Singapore. But having said that, hey, why not? Let's have a new scheme. And I watched this lesson. It's probably the worst lesson I've seen this year, because the teacher had this lovely Singapore maths book and no understanding of what Singapore maths actually was. So there was no training to go along with the research. And she was an NQT, poor soul. And she'd been given this book and said, teach from that. Well, she did teach from that, but she didn't know what she was doing, so no one learnt anything. And 40 minutes later, the children hadn't moved that far in their learning. Procurement was great. They'd bought this scheme, hadn't got the training to go with it. I'm working with her now. It's so exciting.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. There's a lot on the table there. Certainly I've got a lot of questions, but we've got limited time, so I'm keen to go out to the audience and get as many points as I can.
Yeah, question for Jason. What is the optimum size for a mat?
I can only refer to what the research has been showing us and the people that we've spoken to, and certainly it was interesting what you were saying about your mat. You're drawing a mat that's geographically distant from you, because in the recent select committee, that was considered to be one of the worst things that's happened to mats, is that they've been able to set up and be geographically distant, and that one of the key things that they were set out to do was to enable teachers to collaborate, so that if you had, for argument's sake, a maths coordinator was struggling in one school, they could get help from another. Now, I guess geographically we're not talking huge distances for yours, but there are certainly some that are across 11 to 15 local authorities. So the talk seemed to be around about 30, and that was what people were talking about, certainly in select committees and the research that we've done.
For us, I mean, we talk about the geographical distance. It can take 40 minutes for me to get to one of our partner schools in Southend. So the distance between Southend and Newham is really not a problem for us. 40 minutes on the train, 40 minutes in the car, it doesn't really matter. For us, we're talking about growing to 12 schools. We'll be 7 schools by September. 12 is the number that we have in mind, because then we think we can get some real collaboration. We can perhaps have local hubs, a hub in Newham, a hub in Southend. The answers for us don't necessarily lie in Southend. There are a couple of outstanding schools in Southend, but they're different from us. Their demographic is different. They have different challenges. And so working with schools outside of Southend gives us the opportunity to find schools that are serving areas of disadvantage and doing so successfully. And I think there's an enormous amount we can learn from each other, just because local authorities have been so different for so long. It means that breaking out of that cycle, and who knows, 10, 15 years' time, local authorities probably won't exist, but not in the way that we've known them in the past. And so it gives us an opportunity to take back the ground and drive education forward in the way that we believe is correct.
Yes, please, Jeremy, and then Joe.
Yeah, what I see with the mats I work with 2 mats that are about 12 schools. One of them is absolutely outstanding because it's got an outstanding leader who's very clear about the direction that he wants for this group of schools to go in. I work with another group of 5 schools, and it's a shambles. And it's a shambles because it's been like collecting schools. Rather than having a coherent plan forwards, right across the mat in terms of saying, what do we want for our teachers, what do we want for our schools, what do we want for our children, our parents, what's the procurement process going to be? It's just random. So the bigger mats have been better, but it's down to the leadership, it's not down to the size. And as long as you've got a very skilled leader with a passion and a vision and an idea of where the group is going to go, that mat will be successful. And if you've got one who's just thinking, oh, it's quite nice that I've got another school under my wing here, well, from my experience, that mat is much less successful because there's not a coherent strategy in place for anything.
I think from my point of view as well, it's also about the rate of growth. So the mats in our partnership who have been less successful have been the ones who've grown very quickly. And also there is a certain degree of local authority pressure on successful mats to sponsor less successful schools. And the mats who have wavered a little bit too much and ended up with a large number of RI schools in their mat have also been less successful actually, and it's been a much harder journey for them. And the children in the schools that were good and outstanding have definitely paid the price for that.
I think I see a couple of hands over there. So if I can take both of those questions. Yeah, the gentleman with his hand up there.
Good afternoon, my name's Neil Watkins from Think IT. This is a question for each of the heads in turn very quickly, and then for Jason to answer. But at the BISA AGM last year, there was a panel of 4 head teachers, and the chap sat next to me stood up and said, how do we sell to you? And they all said, you can't. We all delegate down to our finance managers or bursars. So that was a real problem for lots of people in the sector. How do they get through to the schools? How to get their message across to schools? So I'd like to ask each of the heads, what do they do in terms of procurement? And then Jason, is there any consistent messages from your research so far?
Dylan Jones. I'm just interested from a governor's perspective. My school that my children go to are currently looking at becoming an academy, and one of our big concerns is our freedom over the vision that we have. We spend a lot of time looking at the vision and the direction for the school, And one of the scary thoughts is joining a MAT is that we will lose our own self-control over that vision, and we will just have to do what the MAT says, and we will lose that freedom.
Thanks. And actually, just before we come back to the panel, one question I've got, and I'm not sure if they're here, but BESA members School Zone did a survey of teachers, about 1,000 teachers, after the white paper came out, and about what they liked and what they disliked about initiatives in the white paper. And the number one thing they disliked more than anything else was the government's target to make all schools academies by 2020. And the second thing they disliked the most was that all academies should be expected to become part of multi-academy trusts. So it does seem like teachers on the ground are very, very resistant to this change. And I'll be really keen to hear your thoughts about why that might be, but also how you can make sure you bring teachers with you on this journey. But please, don't feel the need to answer everything, but if we perhaps start with Jason and then move across, that would be great.
One of the interesting elements in the research is speaking to schools, speaking to the multi-academy trusts. We've spoken to probably about a dozen people that are fairly senior, and a lot of them are very pragmatic, and I think that's one thing that we probably all need to take on board as suppliers, is to not be too panicked straight away in terms of people's intention. And there was one thing that we've been told 2 or 3 times, and that is that the MATs are aware that if they introduce, and I don't know if Toby would have any sort of comments on this, if they introduce dedicated procurement departments, they will spend more money doing that than they will actually save. And if that's not strictly true, it's only a rumour that I think we should all spread. But I don't know whether you've obviously introduced guidelines, but how much time is that taking you or costing your MAT to implement, or is it just simply here's a guideline?
Well, we have a finance director and business and finance managers within the schools, making sure those guidelines are complied with. We don't yet have a contract manager at that level. We're thinking about employing someone to make sure that we're not being taken advantage of, for instance, by our ICT supply.
And Darren.
I'll approach the question about selling to schools first. I think it's about building on existing relationships. So if you have relationships now with schools, then speak to those schools about their intentions, because the companies that we're working with, Edison Learning being one, that has formed from an existing relationship with some of the schools in our multi-academy trust. And it's our positive experiences of working with companies and with groups like that that has informed our decision to go along with certain groups. I'll try and answer the next 2 questions at the same time. Our MAT is very much based on vision and values. So the recruitment process for us in terms of getting new schools to come along and work with us is about finding schools that have a similar ethos to us. And that's really, really important to us. So I know that our CEO has rejected applications from certain schools because they didn't fit with our vision and values. And I know that there are 2 or 3 schools that really do and are very keen to join us in the next year. I think there's a big difference between some of the multi-academy trusts that have been set up and have approached working with new schools as almost like a school in a box model, where, okay, you're going to come and work with us now, here's all your policies, you'll be great. It's not as easy as that. Schools are very individual places and they have very different circumstances. And so those MATs might end up being destined for failure because they're not working together in exactly the right way. And I think that's partly the issue with teachers' views on the subject. I think ideologically, most teachers were opposed to academisation initially. And the fact that it's been set up as a deficit model from the outset and lots of underperforming schools have academised, the news in the press is often a bit doom and gloom. But that doesn't have to be the future for academies. When we spoke to our teachers, we were not doing so at the start of the consultation process. We were very open and honest, including myself and the governing body, talking to our staff about what it was that we wanted and what we wanted to protect about our school and its characteristics and what makes it special. And I think involving teachers in that conversation from the outset meant that it wasn't a surprise. People felt very secure about the process that we were going through and the reasons why we were doing it. And so from a governor perspective, if you are going down that line, what I would say is to talk to the staff, find out what it is about your school that they want to keep, and hold on to that vision. and don't enter into a relationship with a multi-academy trust where that might be compromised.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you. Speaking about the white paper, the question, what were the things they liked? The school sport. I've worked as a school improvement advisor, and all good and outstanding schools do go out. They have I think teachers want to make a difference and help and support colleagues. It's a profession where we all want to work together. We do that anyway, and perhaps the school-to-school model puts a little bit more robustness around that. But the fact that it was a school-led system, using good leaders to share practice and developing our own teachers. I think the emphasis on recruitment was welcomed very much by schools, recruiting and training and addressing the recruitment issues. The idea of forced academisation made people back off a little bit. However, I think they do accept that that's happening. In terms of professional development training, they spoke about redoing the qualifications for middle leaders and senior leaders. That was in the white paper. I think that's welcome, that there's a robust progression through generating leaders that will bring forward our future. In terms of the multi-academy trust, like I say, we're talking about a number of things we might look at. And we spoke about vision and identity and bringing staff with you. Concern some people have, and it's been spoken about at a conference I attended, was the movement of people around the trust to address issues. So if I had a particularly good literacy coordinator, they may be needed to develop in another school. And you want to make sure that staff are reassured, I think, that you're not diluting your key aims, because you have to have the capacity to not only maintain your excellence, but develop excellence elsewhere. And I was speaking to somebody who led a MAT, and he said, estimate what you need in terms of capacity and then double it, because you can often underestimate what that will be. So I think we need to change as schools that go into a MAT, and us thinking about going into a MAT, the vision of us as schools, you need to really have a rethink about the visions of a multi-academy trust all working together, and that's a big change for some schools.
Thanks very much, Claire. No, we're actually running very short on time,
I'll
but
be really
I
quick.
do want...
I'll
No,
talk
no, no,
really
please.
fast.
So, yes, Jo, over to you.
I just want to say something about vision, really, and that's just that what I'm noticing is with successful MATs, there is a sort of an ideological vision that sits above everything else, and then what the schools preserve is something that is a little bit individual. So I sort of would take issue with the word cloning, actually, because where I've seen this working really effectively, that's what they're not doing. They're sharing the values, but actually the schools are very different, and some of the ways that they operate are very different. That feels quite healthy to me. I think in terms of teachers' opposition and the school's own stuff, I'm frankly not surprised, because actually everything about the education system has been changed in the last 2 years, and they're at the risk of sounding like a union rep, we have kind of had enough.
If I can give the final word to you, Jeremy.
Right, just answering the procurement question, you've got to get to the people who understand the learning and the education. It isn't about going into the procurement manager. So if you want to convince a school with IT to buy your IT stuff, then you've got to make the case for why it's going to improve the learning for the children. And that means you've got to get into the teachers. And if you go into the procurement manager and they say, yeah, well, no, we always use this company, then that isn't going to be a persuasive argument. So you have to get into the teachers. And I agree with everything said about vision.
Great. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. These are 5 very busy people that have given up their time to come and talk to us today. If we could give them all a round of applause.